Hi, thanks for coming. So yeah, I just got back from Istanbul, and a pretty mind-altering place. And I thought I would just start with a little shot I took of the Silliman Mosque when I was out there. And you know, it's kind of like almost everything that kind of inspires my work was there. And it's a transportative, incredible place, but I had never been to an actual mosque before, and that's pretty much all I did was go from mosque to mosque. And anyway, a lot of this stuff has influenced me in a roundabout way, primarily through the art objects that have come out of this region of the world. And anyway, it was great to be there, and it's great to be here. So so let me see if I can make this work. Oh, okay. So yeah, oh wow, there's like a thing that tells how much time has elapsed on my thing. So I can find out if I'm going over. So I don't know, I think, did you say I was from Southern California in your introduction?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I grew up in Southern California, pretty close to Disneyland. And so pretty much every night at around 9 o'clock, fireworks would go off, and then Tinkerbell would fly around outside, and I thought that was really normal. And it actually took. I kind of grew up just thinking that's just how people were, even though I kind of knew intellectually they weren't. I just sort of assumed that something like that was happening just about everywhere. But it took me my move to New York to really kind of maybe put my experiences in dislocated reality into some kind of context. But it so affected me, this notion of the fabricated reality. And it wasn't just theme parks, it was like the shopping mall, surf culture and the drug culture of Southern California that I grew up in, that this sort of dislocated reality I just took for granted. And I was telling this story earlier to Michael. I mean, some friends of mine went up to a local canyon that I grew up next to, you know, I don't know, to smoke pot or something, and we hiked up for like 3 miles, and we found a waterfall. And I had never really seen a waterfall in nature before. I mean, I'd seen them at Tom Sawyer's Island in Disneyland, but I'd never actually seen one. And you know, we'd walked so far, and we were so far away from civilization, but yet I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that it just existed without the intervention of man, and I actually was looking for the conduit and the pumps that were running it, and when I found out that they just exist without human, making, it actually blew my mind. So it turned out that the real was more unreal in my mind than the unreal. I was just so used to the fabricated reality of our culture that it was hard for me to wrap my mind around that kind of phenomenon. But that did, in fact, I think inform like not only my work, this notion of fabricated realities, but also my love of nature. And and I went and did my own Jack Kerouac Dharma Bums thing out in the Sierras for a while. And but anyway, this is a work that I did, and I was an installation artist in the early '80s in Los Angeles, primarily working in the nonprofit ghetto over there, and I was doing a lot of works that dealt with immersive, fabricated reality, where I was utilizing the tropes of theme parks, but I was trying to make the subjects its own sort of otherworldly or other reality, or the idea of a reality-modifying space, and I really wanted to like point out is the artificiality. This is a piece I did at Leica in I think it was in 1983, and it was just a bunch of styrofoam cups that had little tethers, little string tethers, on the floor, and they blew about in the wake of these floor fans, and it sort of caused, it was sort of a hypnotic, environment that was very quiet and meditative, but it also it sort of alluded to the ocean, but it also alluded to the detritus that was and the flotsam and jetsam of pollution that is lies on the surface of water. And I also could utilize this sort of this metaphoric container of liquid to sort of like invert it in this piece to actually sort of connote liquidity. So I think that was like an important piece for me for a lot of reasons. The artificiality, the sort of meditative qualities, and the sort of repetition that is involved in this. I'm not going to show you much work from this time, but I just want to give you a context for how I became a painter, or how I invented myself as a painter. I had abandoned painting because of the burden of history. I had majored in painting and drawing, but I couldn't really figure out a way to get out from under that burden of history. And I was really excited and turned on by some of the new media that was being done in Los Angeles at that time. I was particularly interested in Chris Burden, whose work seemed to shock my mother as much as the Stooges. And so the teen boy rebel really liked that. I was really interested. I saw the Bruce Nauman retrospective at Leica in the early 70s. And for me, it was like a Disneyland of the repressed. And I mean, I had nobody to parse or interpret this work for me. So, but I was, fortunately, there was a girl I was friends with. Her mother was sort of a hippie, and she would take us to these things. And she'd just go, let's just go out and find out, just find out for yourself what this is. And we even she took, we saw Light in Space, I saw a Terrell show, and so all this new media really turned me on, and I felt like I can't make a painting, I can't compete with, with Caravaggio or Frangelico, or I can't do that. So, so I began working in the performative and an installation world. I did, at that time, I did done a performance with Paul McCarthy, and I was doing these works. But anyway, I moved to New York. That's the only piece from LA I'm going to show you. So I moved to New York, and I was living in Williamsburg at the time, and this is like 1985, and I just remembered one of the things that's, the reason that everybody's like fucked up and is junky and is they can't see the night sky. So I'm going to make my own night sky. So I took a map of the heavens, which is circular, and then sort of visually sort of stretched out that circle into a square, and then chopped that square into 30 units, and then folded those squares up, and then thereby containerizing the infinite. And I made this object called cubic sky. So, and each one of these is sort of obsessively, each plane of the sky I would mark on the top and with the constellations, and I was actually super obsessive about it. And it's just these plexiglass boxes that I spray painted with a lot of paint, and then etched out these stars, and then put a little fluorescent light in them. But I just wanted to show you that. And at the time, I was thinking that looking up at the heavens was your oldest way of turning your back on the world, and I got to be kind of God over this infinite universe that I had made finite. So. And I showed this at Josh Baer Gallery, and I had done a lot of work like this, but I'm only going to show you that because I don't have a lot of time here. And but anyway, I was making these. So anyway, I was thinking about I was starting to make objects that were getting closer and closer to the wall, like discrete objects that weren't installations. This is a work, for instance, called from 1988 called "The Sweet Aroma of Revolution." And from the front, it sort of utilizes the symbol of the Symbionese Liberation Army, the revolutionary cell that kidnapped Patty Hearst and created a media spectacle and was eventually burned to death by the LAPD. But in my case, it's a seven-headed bong, functioning bong. So you can actually use the painting. See, it's like cheap animation here. You can. So on the back, it's it's also an appropriated symbol. I mean, the Symbionese Liberation Army was, a neo-Maoist organization that co-opted the Shagnag from Hindu iconography, and it's the serpent that as coils it creates the universe, and as it uncoils it destroys the universe. But in their sort of reductivist idea, they were thinking of this collectivity of communists, heads all coming together, with Commander Sing Q at the top, this top-down hierarchy of neo-Maoism. But I was thinking about the whole this idea of the pipe dream of the revolution, of revolutionary politics, and this idea of the utopianism. I was just thinking about the utopianism of not just the world that bracketed my life, not just but the dashed hopes of the utopianist spirit from hippie neo-transcendentalism that had crashed and burned into disco and cocaine, and modernism, running out of steam and falling apart. And I was thinking about how that dovetailed with Malevich being co-opted by Stalinism, or how the futurists had become fascists. And I just realized that I was inheriting this legacy of at that particular time of all this sort of rubble of all this history. And I just wanted to go back into that history and see if there was anything I could reclaim, that was worth investigating. So anyway, and I was also interested in taking my viewers into other dimensions on top of all of that. So this is another work that alludes to something like that. This is a piece called Comforter. And what it is a sleeping bag made out of, at the time, there were these 9-100 sex hotline matchbook covers and get rich quick matchbook covers. And I was thinking about the neurological network of the phone system in New York. This is, I think I made this in 1988. But I was thinking about, this lonely dude sort of slipping into and these are for dudes, slipping into this sort of sleeping bag and just letting all these sort of fantasies of sex and money and power sort of roll through this body. That this is sort of this conduit for that kind of neurological, extra neurological network. And so anyway, I don't know what I'm gonna talk about here. Oh, so this is a work called Every Rock Band I Can Remember Seeing, and it's sort of set up to be like two lobes of a brain. I was trying to remember everything, and I wanted to make this sort of constellation, and there was this hierarchy of the bands I really liked versus the bands that really sucked. And then that in turn led to another work, which I don't have a reproduction of, called Every Rock Band I Can Remember Seeing, mixed with every vertebrate in North America that's become extinct since 1492. So it's sort of about seeing and not seeing, nature and culture, and it's also about positing my own hedonism while the world around me fell apart. So anyway, there you go. That in turn led to these portraits, I think you could call them, of friends of mine that were based on questionnaires, where I would ask the sitter in a questionnaire to give me their birth date and to give me a list of every drug they could remember taking. So what I would do is I would use the birth date to find a constellation in the heavens, and then I would take pills and sugar and put them on photographic paper and expose it to light, working in the dark with making these photograms. And then I would label these constellations with their chemical history. So it became a chemical celestial portrait, a portrait of inner space and outer space. So I went ahead and made a portrait of my 12 friends and the 12 houses of the zodiac. And I'm not really into astrology, but it just seemed like a great organizational tool for trying to figure out another way of describing people. And as you can see, it's sort of roughly maybe comports to something what I was doing with Cubic Sky that I showed a little earlier. So anyway, I did a few of those, and then print photographic media became harder and harder to work with as digital took over. And so anyway, I was thinking about paintings. I had made these little drawings. I was chopping cabbages and finding these little psychedelic drawings. And I was also a Sunday painter the whole time I was an installation artist. But I really didn't feel like it was art. I didn't really feel like I was going anywhere, or certainly not anything worth thinking or showing to anybody. But I started thinking, a lot about pictures and this pre-modernist ideal of paintings as windows to another reality, this idea of losing yourself in this other world and possibly a transcendent or sublime space. And I thought that the rhetoric around pre-modernist art dovetailed quite neatly with the rhetoric around psychedelic drugs. And since I'd had like pretty phenomenal experiences in both, I just found it really uncanny. And I started, thinking about like how they were so alike. And and anyway, I had this background in surfboard making, in California. I'd worked a lot with industrial resin material, as many of the sort of blue-collar garage people in my neighborhood did. And so I thought, like, maybe I can, and I also had this background in woodworking. I was doing a lot of inlay and marquetry and frame making in New York. And so I had this woodworking background, and I thought, well, why don't I just, maybe I could just inlay these pills into these like surfaces, and they could function like paintings, but they really wouldn't be paintings. And I could rearrange the use value. I could like in this case, this is called Big As Me. This is made in 1990. And I was thinking like, a viewer could look at the pills with their eyes instead of taking them through their mouths, and it could be a different way to altering perception. So at that time, I was just, this is like I said, a piece called Big As Me, and it was like a little spinal cord, in my mind, made out of aspirin, Tylenol, and saccharin. And it was a sort of an homage to the Bruce Nauman show that I had seen in 1974, where every object in that show seemed to address issues that were coming out of his body. So it was sort of my homage to him. And then that in turn started leading to more and more painterly things. Like this is a piece called 13,000. I still haven't used paint yet, but what I'm doing is I'm routing, slots, and this is a 4x4 piece of plywood, and then just packing it with aspirin, and then flood coating it with multiple coats of resin, and then sanding it down. And so that these works, if you see them in real life, they're sort of like have a satin semi-gloss surface, and they look very much, like the kind of the surface quality of cars or surfboards. And in that regard, they sort of dovetailed with California finish fetish or West Coast finish fetish, which at the time I really hated. It's really ironic, but I really wanted to figure out. I had to figure out a way to sort of containerize and preserve this ephemeral material. So anyway, but I also found it to be somewhat seductive, and I felt that the seduction involved in these materials was seemed to address the conceptual ideas that I had about what I wanted these works to do. So anyway, I was working with all these pharmaceuticals, and I thought, well, I should incorporate some. These are all just over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, nothing major. But then I thought I needed to include something that signifies countercultural drug use, because I just sort of felt whether it was pharmacological or countercultural, it was all about this, more or less the same thing. At least for me, it was. It was all about better living through chemistry. And so I started growing pot. Primarily at that time, I was smoking a lot of pot then, but I was like, I thought I would, I wanted to like put pot leaves in the work. So this is an early work. This is from 1992. It's called Expo Fade. In this case, I had painted all the leaves the same. I knew they were going to shift to gold over time, and this is a photograph taken long after I made it. But I painted all the leaves pretty much the same color they were, except for that X, where I used solar light to sort of find that X over time. But anyway, what it inadvertently did was it put the shape of nature back into my work, and the shape of nature just sort of like really opened up a whole bunch of stuff that ended up in the work later. This is one of the first works I did where I actually started painting on the work. This is a work called I Could See Your Voice. I was thinking about synesthesia and the visualization of sound, and sort of working with the illegibility of psychedelic lettering and vocode, Richter scales and ways of measuring or seeing sound. And then in this case here, this blue area is floating just about I don't know, less than a quarter inch above the plane below it. But it starts to give you this sort of like dimensionality and shadow play, which I really liked. So I'm just going to roll through these really quick. Now my work really, there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of hybridity in my work, not just in terms of like in this case, not just in terms of like the objects that I use, but also in terms of the pictorial traditions that I tend that have tend to come to play in my work. For instance, this is a piece called Superplant, and what it is an actual hybrid of 6 different psychoactive plants. So you have, cannabis, ephedra, which is the building block of ephedrine or methamphetamine, coffee beans, morning glory seeds, which contain an indole related to LSD, tobacco leaves, and shrooms, and in blue flowers, which the reason I call it Superplant was if it ever existed, it would rule the world. But I was also hybridizing or thinking about like how, the floral motifs that one sees in, say, Rajasthani miniatures, but also like maybe the shaker tree of life, like Americana folk art. So I was sort of conflating these various traditions. But the thing that was really freaked me out the most was its overt decorativeness. And I was so embarrassed by this piece that I hid it for almost a year because I just thought it was super. I mean, I had been making these geometric-based abstractions. It seemed to like tough enough, right? But then doing stuff like this, I was just like, oh man, I don't know, But I eventually showed it, and it turned out to be a really important work for me. But it turned out that was like a real, for me, it was like a personally transgressive to jump over into this overtly decorative thing. So I'm just going to show you a few pieces. This is another piece made out of ephedra. It's called Utah Saint. The Mormons have you can't drink. I have Mormons in my family, although I was raised Catholic. But the Mormons you can't drink caffeine. But they found out that nobody had said anything about ephedra, which grows all over the area around Salt Lake City. So it's called Mormon tea out there, and everybody just, like, whacks that stuff down and gets all speeded up. Anyway, this is a work I did where I was living upstate New York, up around Saugerties, and I was working in this barn, and it's really buggy there in the summer, and I was by this creek, the Esopus Creek, and I was, I'm trying to, I'm working with this resin, which is very sticky, and any dust or anything gets stuck in the resin, it's there forever, and so when I started working with this stuff, like invariably a bug would fly in and get stuck in the resin. It was just driving me crazy. So I decided, if you can't beat them, join them. So I brought the canvases that were yellow at the time out into the meadow by my house, and I aimed these giant lights at it in the middle of the night. And then all these bugs came up off the river, and they stormed around this piece, by all this work. It was just this huge storm of bugs. And when they reached their apex, I poured out the resin, and they all stuck and died in random formations. It was almost like a portrait of the atmosphere at the time. And then what I ended up doing was building a sort of a narrative object around that event. In this case, I inverted the bug death. Instead of them dying, they're actually hatching out of this cadaver-like figure that I've inserted into the grass out of these like various cavities. And I've created these sort of hybrids of real bugs and painterly bugs and bugs with pills. And so there's these sort of monster bugs that are conjunction with the real bugs. So I forget what I call that, but it doesn't matter. And then around the same time, I was trying to quit smoking, and I was wearing these nicotine patches so I thought, well, I'm going to make a paint about skin, because there's this whole idea about oil paint is about it's all this sort of fatty stuff that's like skin. I'm going to make a work about skin. So I gritted off this piece, and every day while I was going crazy trying to quit smoking, I rip my nicotine patch off and stick it on one of the grids, and then start cutting out pieces of skin from magazines, little squares of skin, all G-rated, and just stuck it all over there, and then put in Band-Aids and other things that related to skin. So I made this 6.5 by 9 foot pelt called Dermal Delivery, or How I Quit Smoking. And so anyway, and so that's how that. So there was a lot of these like kind of private performances that were going on that where I'd have this object that would sort of function as a reliquary, which I blame on my Catholic upbringing. It's like the veneration of bones of the saints, the true cross of Christ. You grow up with all that, these magic objects, these objects that look like, they don't look like anything, but they're created, they're turned into these magic things throughout the rhetoric that surrounds them. And I thought that was really interesting. That kind of is like conceptual art. Like if you see a photograph and you can't tell, but then there's this whole story about it that imbues the photograph with kind of meaning in a funny way. That's a certain kind of transubstantiation. So I'm sort of conflating these things, and so these objects become reliquaries of these events. So this is a work. So anyway, I was thinking, like, if I'm going to make objects that allude to transportation into other realities, I'm going to go to places I want to go. So I would take, like, this is based on, this is called Ocotillo Nocturne, and it's just based on a composite of like 6 different photographs I took of the desert around Joshua Tree, and I made this painting based on that, this sort of with this Ed Ruscha, surfer van, custom car culture background. Hey, you know what? Do the lights need to be this bright? Can people see? Can we turn the lights down? I just realized that it's sort of washed out. Or is this a problem? Yes. Is it kind of washed out? Yeah. Can we turn the lights down? I just realized that, like, if I'm going to show you stuff, and this isn't art, this is images of art, but if you're going to see images of art, they should be a little better. If we could just, that's a little better. I'm really, anyway, if you're going to see this stuff, that's way better. Thank you. Anyway, so now you can see you can see the little black silhouettes there. So anyway, when I was making this work, I was thinking, like, I'd love to be like, like Bierstadt or Cole or any of these Hudson River School guys and, make full-on, landscape paintings that are all about the sublime and all that. But, I can't do that, and I wanted to, like, talk about landscape seen through this scrim of culture. And in my mind, whenever I see landscape, I can access it, and I think I can access it in a pretty, I can have a pretty true and great experience with it, but I also see landscape as politically charged, as environmentally compromised, as a manifestation of geopolitical, strife. And so I wanted to sort of put this sort of scrim of information that you have to look through to find landscape. So I was using these arabesques and other things to sort of play with that idea. And I did a series of these works called Ripple Trees, Blue Circles. Anyway, I think you get the idea. I did a lot of work, many works around that same time that were based on the found abstractions in topographical maps. This is a work called Double Landscape. And what it is the central portion of this work here is a painting that I did based on a photograph of the Jemez Mountains in New Mexico. And then the surrounding topographical swirly psychedelic thing is actually the same information from the map's perspective. And then inside of these sort of topographical map information that's dotted with saccharin tablets are these meandering shapes that utilize the 6 building blocks of organic nature. You don't need to know all this. I'm just telling you because I'm here and got to say something. So anyway, so this is my garden in my backyard in Brooklyn. And this is where a lot of like the plant material for my works come out of. This, for instance, is Jimson weed and datura, if you will. And this is from a seed pod I got in Utah, and I brought it back and I grow it. It's a pan-global hallucinogen. It's very dangerous. I would never take it. A friend of mine took it once, and it was bad for him. And so I'm afraid of it, but I do like magic plants. So anyway, what I do is I take all these various plants and I press them in, in plant presses, and then put them in like acetate binders and have like big stacks of them. And then I also collect a lot of information from magazines and gardening catalogs and field guides. And what I do is I scan them, pre-cut them on archival paper, put them on sticky paper, and then archive them into these, I have these giant, I have like, what do you call it, flat files with all this stuff piled up. When I was using drugs, I had all the pills. I don't use pills in my work anymore, but I think I stopped about almost 10 years ago, but they would all be sorted to, genus, species, size, color. All of this stuff is sort of like almost, pseudo-Victorian in terms of like, trying to organize the world. And then this is my studio, and then I basically have to work on the floor, and I have this bridge that I move around, and I just sort of like, and these pieces, panels wooden panels that I work on, and I have to work over it using, mostly on my knees or on my stomach, and then having to get up on a ladder, and then I glue them down, and then I end up making art out of it. And then, what I eventually do is, I'll build up layers and then paint between layers so that the paint is floating at various levels. So, and I really like, I think, how I like the destabilization that occurs between the real things, the painted thing, the painterliness, and the photographic imagery. It's sometimes, I think, hard to tell the nature of the reality of the things that one is seeing in my work. And it's also sometimes hard to find the right focal point for my work. And all of that, I think, is that destabilization is sort of integral to what I'm trying to do. This is a similar work, but just turned on its side and flopped over into a mirror. This is called Echo, Wow, and Flutter. Another work dealing with synesthesia. Oh, man, I got to go. It's like 31 minutes. It's called Bird Blast. So I'm just going to... So anyway, coming from a working class background, that we're all, oldest of 6 kids, immigrant families, never waste anything. I have all these, these bird books that I would cut these birds out of with these voids, and so I couldn't stand to waste them. So I also had these Land's End catalogs. So ever since I saw that Terrell show in the early 70s where I was laughing at this square that seemed to be painted on the wall, I was like going, stupid modern art. And I went and touched it, and it turned out to be limitless space. And I went, oh, wow, that's awesome. And ever since I love this idea of like, playing perceptual tricks on the viewer. I love like what you see isn't what's really there, or look at it a little longer and see something else, or I want art that makes me pay attention. So I made a series of these works that look from across the room like little Audubons or whatever, and then you get up close and you see they're all made out of like, they all have zippers and Gore-Tex and little fasteners and polar fleece. And I was sort of conflating these two ways of like, of cultural interference with the love of nature, this idea of naming things with our books and this sort of like, petrochemical outerwear that we tend to wear. So, and then, maybe asking larger ecological questions about why the birds have to wear these outfits. So anyway, getting back to, earlier I was discussing, this like legacy of failure, of ideological and utopian failure that I had inherited in the Silliman of rubble. I was thinking about how, in American culture, history really is this idea of imposing ideology onto nature. And so this is a work called New Jerusalem. And in the center in this oval center of the work, that's surrounded with this Victorianish sort of framing device, is what appears to be a peaceful little town. But in reality, you got the Unibarber cabin, Thoreau's cabin, the Aryan Nations compound, Drop City commune, Amish community, Shaker meeting house, Mormon pluralist house. In other words, various militia groups. So instead of really having this peaceful little town, you have this town of, suspicion and hate, which is a lot of like America, at least to me. And I sort of felt like, and so I did a lot of these works that dealt with sort of the imposition of ideology onto nature. This is another work, a similar vein called Goth. So anyway, called, I don't know. So it's called Monster of Paradise. I was thinking about Devi and Shiva, the destroyer goddesses from Hindu iconography, and then kind of using some more of that, the sort of like housing, this sort of utopianist spiritual political housing from American history, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, all this sort of basic, sort of notions of why, the fall of man. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, that in turn led to this work here that, where I was, at the time it was right after 9/11, and I was trying to process all that was going on, and there were some, health and death issues near to me, and I was listening a lot at that time to Harry Smith folk anthology, which is all this, which is sort of like, almost, it's basically the text really for the counterculture. It's 1951. It's just an amazing like collection of anthology of American folk music that just kind of influenced everybody. But all the songs a lot of the songs are about like little girls falling into wells and death and depression and murder and I was listening to all that, and I was also looking at a lot of Black Tibetan tankas, which all like deal with like human flaying the skins, and demon gods, and anyway, so I started, and I was also looking at a lot of Arcamboldo. So anyway, this is a piece called Breathing Head. Oh, this is the Tibetan imagery here. This is the outer Yama raping a guy to death. Super awesome and amazing piece. Anyway, I have a couple of these things at home, and I've gotten a lot of juice out of them over the years. This is Garland of Severed Heads. This really influenced me on that work earlier that I showed you called Echo Wow and Flutter, and a work prior to that called Gravity's Rainbow. This Garland of Severed Heads was really important to me. Anyway, this is all about like ruminating on your own mortality and getting to the next bardo. I don't know. It's just pretty awesome. Even though I'm like total like atheist, it's just awesome. So a friend of mine, this is called Field Guides. A friend of mine said, "Oh, this is like one of those guys in that utopian communities that you were alluding to a few years earlier." In this case, a lot of people thought that he was being anointed by these butterflies, but I thought he was being attacked by them. But, whatever. This is a portrait of my son based on photographs of him. And this is his own utopia of outgassing plastic rubble from China that littered our house. And just thought I'd show that to you. It's called Expecting to Fly. And, I don't know. I think you get it, right? This is a work that called Airborne Event that started out as an all-over abstraction, and at some point I started thinking about, it was like I had been reading Don DeLillo's novel, White Noise, and it talks about a toxic airborne event over, I don't know if you guys ever read it, it's an awesome book. This is a guy who lives in a Midwestern college town and runs a Hitler study department. And but this like toxic cloud comes in, and I was thinking like, oh yeah, toxic cloud. And I started thinking about like the ascension of Virgin Mary into heaven and alien space abduction and toxic chemicals. The next thing you know, I made this woman being captured by this like chemical kind of cloud-like thing, and that's what happened. So So anyway, I'm just going to like ring through. This is like a hummingbird. This is a bird with a snake. Darwinism. I actually saw a hawk eat a snake, and so this is what time? Oh man, we're getting late. These are real figs from my garden, real fig leaves from my backyard tree. Based on I saw some, every day the birds come in and try to eat my figs. I chase them away. And then one day I saw this really awesome bird, and this thing came out of it. So these are pretty large. For me, they're large. They're about 8 by 7 feet. So anyway, so I've been vacillating between abstraction and representation. I've been like kind of creating through the years a sort of a palimpsest of information, adding narrative and various elements into this once very austere work. This is a work, for instance, it's about me rubbing my eyes and getting the phosphenes, those little things, those little shapes, and trying to draw them before they go away. But anyway, so this is, maybe this is like the last work of this series that I'm going to show you. In this work, I was like copying like Masaccio's The Expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, and I thought in this case I would try to, have the hubris to try to depict God, or the angel, pushing them out of heaven. And then around 2005, I had done this in 1999, and in 2005 I saw this photograph, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. I looked at it all day. It was, Bernie Ebbers being found guilty in this $11 million fraud. And it reminded me very much of the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Except in this case, they're being driven out of the Wall Street financial markets by the camera-wielding paparazzi of the media. And this look, this stunned look on his face, really, it's just really captivating. And he was such a jerk. But then I also couldn't get out of my head like the humanity in this clutching his hands with his wife, and so I was like, I was really getting discombobulated about my hatred of him as an emblematic figure of these corrupt financial markets, but then this humanity in the hands. So I just couldn't get, and at that point I would read the Times every morning. I was getting really pissed off. Bush had started a bunch of phony wars. I was really upset. I was started graffitiing, write "fuck you" on the newspaper and stuff. My wife would go, "Why are you writing on the newspaper? I can't read it." And then, so I took this thing to my studio, and I made this. And then, and then Creative Time asked me, "You want to do an edition for our benefit?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do this." But I want to make blotter acid. So I found a guy who makes LSD in Boston, and we perfed it up, and we sold it as an edition. And I just thought it'd be the worst acid you could ever take, And so you can see the little perf marks here. It's a lot of acid, but we didn't soak it. It's legal. But that led. So you can see how its relationship, to this earlier work that I'd done like 6 years prior. So anyway, that led to like a whole series of works that are in the next room over there. That's sort of like I've been working on simultaneously while making these larger paintings and while making these other photograms and other things that I've been doing. And in each one of these works, where I try to kind of respond to the facts of the particular thing that I'm looking at, the particular image. Like in this case, I found the waterline of New Orleans, a city I dearly love, and then used that to find an abstraction in this sort of toxic water world. And the thing about it is that basically as a collagist, I'm working with this sort of, I'm already working with the collective image bank of mankind. All these other authors are already sort of buzzing about in my work, all these photographers and other illustrators. And I do tend to see myself as a conductor of other people's images. And it seems like, that the newspaper itself is sort of a manifestation of collectivity, of thousands of people coming together to make what we look at as consensus or objective reality, even though we know that's probably not true. But for me, I like the fact that there's this buzz of bylines and this buzz of other information. And then I always leave like the name of the guy below it. So, so that I can have a kind of a dialogue with what were formerly anonymous people in my other works. So I'm just going to, and they also sort of function as sort of like, they kind of reliquaries of like where they like stop time and sort of sit on the wall. In that regard, I sort of see them as I see them as being both indebted to Ankara and also to Warhol, who's certainly been a huge influence on my work, and who's also, I think, a person who was very influenced by his sort of Byzantine Catholic background. And but I just wanted to give him some props here. But I also think that like these works, for me at least, function in a similar way to Miraut's constellation paintings that he did during World War II. I mean, Europe is burning. Miraut's running around trying to keep away from the Nazis, and he's making these sort of cosmic paintings. And in a funny way, my work is, in this regard, in this context, it's like if there's any real politics involved in the work, it's sort of like the world is going to hell and I keep making art, right? Like there's almost no excuse for it except that I have to do it. And so anyway, so I just like what I try to do, what's good about this for me at least, is it keeps me a little off balance. Every object, every image has to be responded to in its own way. Like in this case, Ahmadinejad, I just thought, yeah, he's a jerk, but I'm gonna humiliate him by making him like, I'm gonna cover him with flowers. And but then I found all these catenary shapes in there of these like other, these holy men, whatever. And so I also copped my own work into the background and sort of cut and paste. So I get to just sort of play around. This is Blank Fiend, and what's funny thing is that like a lot of the earlier work all came before the financial crisis, and I had no idea that all that stuff was going to happen. Sometimes there's images of incredible sadness, and I guess the one thing I don't want to do is aesthetify human suffering. And so I don't want to just put it on a wall and then like have, people look at that and like it. I don't want them to like that. So if it's really terrible, sometimes I obliterate the image. Like this is like Haitians scrambling to get water, and there's like, it's just terrible, awful, heartrending picture. So what I did was I allowed the buzz of that to come through this sort of black pattern, but you don't really get to see it. But you still get the context of the surrounding news. There's Ahmadinejad again, dreaming of a better life. Sarah. So I'm just going to run through these. There's a whole bunch I haven't said. There's things I could say. I don't know. I haven't really talked about this work so much. I guess in a funny way, these works have become a kind of a reliquary for print media. In that, there's going to be a period. I actually mostly read the Times online now anyway, since I began this project. And so anyway, but I keep having to subscribe to its print edition because it's every morning it can be like Christmas. I don't know what I'm going to get. And this has now been turned into another huge archive that's in conjunction with my other archives. I have like every New York Times front page since 2005, since I began this project. So anyway, that has in turn kind of like, it's sort of informed my work that's happening in the studio simultaneously with it. This is a work called Big Stack. And what it is actually about old media, it's about new media. it's sort of like about the internet, I guess, in that it's this using the found sculpture of rock shows, the Marshall Stack. In this case, though, it's just broadcasting. It's like this Tower of Babel. This is like a 12-foot tall piece, or 10-foot tall piece. That's like a radio antenna or a Tower of Babel or the internet. This is a work called Car Bomb. Burning Tower of Peace Towers. This is more or less based on, I was asked by Rit and DeSubro to participate in the Whitney Peace Tower project. And I was like, oh, that can't be the only peace tower. And I Googled it, and there's like thousands of peace towers from throughout history. So I took all the images and turned them into this, peace towers, peace pagodas, peace temples, peace monuments, made them into a big giant tower and lit it on fire. Abductor. I made this the entire time, the New Orleans event. This is sort of, whatever. It's Thoreau's cabin. The Shoghnag, Sudanese Liberation Army. This is like 6 by 6 feet. This is a recent work. I'm not even I think it's Untitled. And so I've been working I've been vacillating between abstraction and representation, between narrative and the New York Times, doing these little photograms at home. There's a big bird's eye that I'm sort of working with, like sort of like minimalist, sort of Kenneth Noland, I guess, or something. But it's made out of thousands of bird's eyes into a mega bird eye. This is called Night Music for Raptors. These two, it's sort of about like, and it's also another work dealing with sound, and that these are two exact same sizes as 2 LP records. And I was thinking about it as 2 turntables as seen from above, and thinking about these little like dots that I painted on top of it, these little concentric circles as being like akin to stars, or the feathers of this owl, or the notes of music at night. And anyway, that's it. That's it.